As someone who's traveled extensively throughout Europe, I get a lot of questions and comments from friends and acquaintances about how I afford it, as if Europe travel itself is inherently expensive. But the truth is, my wife and I once traveled full-time through Europe on an average daily budget of $50 per person per day, and truthfully, you can do it for much less than that. Here's the thing, we didn't have to stay in a bunch of hostels or have a lackluster experience in order to pull off that very reasonable budget. Sometimes we even got to fly business class and stay in 5-star hotels. And so in this video, I want to share 15 easy ways you can save money on your next Europe trip without feeling like you're making major sacrifices. But first, anytime I make a video with Europe in the title, at least a handful of people show up with their metaphorical pitchforks to remind me of this. Europe isn't one place, like Disney World. Europe is a continent made up of more than 40 countries and tons of distinct regions with vastly different customs and norms. And of course, they're right. And that leads perfectly into one of the easiest ways you can save money on your Europe trip. Choose cheap destinations. When you look at the cost of living throughout countries in Europe, there are vast differences there too. Take Switzerland and Bulgaria, for example, very different situations. And the same can be said about the cost to travel. Choosing a cheaper destination is one of the least complicated and most forgiving ways you can save. I'm not telling you not to visit all the places that you've dreamt of. But if you're on a very tight budget, and let's say, for example, you're itching for a Mediterranean climate, you could trade beaches in Italy or Greece for beaches in Albania and save a ton of money and possibly even get to splurge more without feeling it. When you travel is huge too. Another great way to save is traveling outside peak season. Pricing for things like flights, lodging, and certain other travel expenses fluctuate based on demand, and demand tends to fluctuate seasonally. So, if you can swing it, aim to travel in the shoulder season or off season of your desired destination to save money and, I really like this part, avoid crowds. Getting too far into the off season can sometimes be problematic because certain things might be closed, but do your research and you'll be fine. Not defaulting to renting a car can be a good way to save because renting a car can be expensive and a hassle, especially if you're in a city that has public transportation. Parking can be costly, and honestly, if you're spending most of your time in a city, the car may not even be necessary. If you do have stretches of your trip that require a car, just do what you can to avoid picking up in one country and dropping off in another because that can cost a lot. And if your trip is predominantly in cities, use the public transportation. It's usually efficient, affordable, and well connected. We're not used to that in the USA, for example, but in a lot of places in Europe, it's an excellent way to go. It's also a great alternative to taxis and ride shares, depending on where you're going. For example, a taxi from Rome's airport to the city center costs about €50 one way, while a ticket on the Leonardo Express train from the airport directly to the city center costs only €18. If you plan to visit a lot of sites, city passes and bundles can be a great way to save money. A lot of times, these passes even include skip the line benefits and access to public transport. For example, if you're visiting Rome and you plan to hit several of the famous sites, you might want to get something like the Roma Pass, which includes access to many of the sites within Rome and extensive access to Rome's public transport network for a full 72 hours. I'd also recommend looking for free attractions. Many cities have cool free things to do that can be just as fun and interesting as paid attractions, and balancing your time between free and paid experiences is an easy way to save. For example, there are several great free museums in London. Taking a free walking tour is another great example. Now, when you do a free walking tour, tips are strongly encouraged. These guides need those tips, but it's still going to be cheaper than a $30 museum entry. Also, just walking from point to point, people watching and looking at cool architecture is a great way to save. My first ever trip to Europe, my buddy and I were running pretty low on funds by the end of our 5 weeks. We were in Berlin at the time when we adopted what we still refer to as the Berlin method, which is where we point to an interesting looking building on the horizon, walk to it, paying absolutely no money to enter it because we're not entering, admiring it up close, and then picking a new building somewhere else and doing it all over again. That may not be for everyone, but it really helped us enjoy where we were at without having to spend a lot of money. Most people can easily cut down how much it'll cost to use their phone while traveling by not purchasing the extra plan with their home carrier. And there are a few ways you could go about this. You could just keep your phone on airplane mode and only use Wi-Fi. I did that for a long time. You could also buy a local SIM card when you land, but I generally find this to be a hassle, and you can sometimes get scammed doing this. So I like to recommend using an eSIM. It's an awful lot like getting a local SIM card, but you don't have to go anywhere or talk to anyone or physically put anything into your phone. My eSIM of choice is Olafly, which offers eSIMs in over 200 destinations worldwide with no roaming fees, and over 150 of those destinations offer unlimited data. Olafly's mobile app makes it super easy to purchase and install an eSIM. The whole process only takes a couple of minutes, and you've got access to 24/7 customer support if you need it. A 10-day trip using Olafly's Europe plan costs $37 versus $100 via Verizon. And unlike Verizon, there are no hidden costs, no data caps, and what you see is what you get. So if you're ready to stop paying for expensive international data plans, hit the link below and use the code AWAYTOGETHER for an additional 5% off your eSIM purchase. Big thanks to Olafly for sponsoring this video. A great way to take your money and throw it straight into the toilet is eating at touristy places right next to the big attractions and touristy sites. The closer you are to major tourist sites, the more likely that you're dining in a tourist trap. I know there's exceptions to this. For example, one of my favorite pizza spots ever is very close to the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. But in general, just walk a few blocks away from the crowded touristy areas. And consider a great way to save money is adapting to local tastes. Drink beer in Czechia, but wine in France. Eat the pasta specific to the region you're visiting in Italy. Order soup in Croatia. Learn the tapas scene in Spain. Eat bigos in Poland. Doing what the locals do will not only lead to you learning something and having a better experience, but it will usually save you money too. All right, let's talk about lodging. My favorite type of place to stay in most parts of Europe is a family-run mid-range hotel or bed and breakfast. It's a great way to meet and support locals. And although tools like Booking.com and Google Hotels are a great way to find good places to stay, you can often save big money on your lodging simply by booking direct. Third-party sites like Booking.com tend to take a big cut, like 15 to 20%. And unfortunately, it's just a fact of life for most of these family hotels in order for them to remain relevant and competitive. Well, you can often get a discount by finding that hotel or bed and breakfast site and booking with them directly. If the price on their site is listed as the same, I would say don't be afraid to send them an email and simply ask for a discounted rate. The worst they can say is no. Now, it used to take quite a bit of searching to figure out how to book direct, but recently I've been using this tool called Directo, which is a free Chrome extension. You just search for lodging the way that you normally would, and then if there's a way to get in touch directly, Directo just gives you the link so you don't have to go find it yourself. It's pretty cool. Another tool you can use when researching places to stay is RatePunk. This is a website and a Chrome extension that shows you how to find the best deal. When you're using Booking.com, Expedia, Priceline, Agoda, or even Airbnb, RatePunk shows you if you've found the best deal or not. And next, and this is the cool part, in certain cases, it tells you if you're being price gouged based on your location. And then it tells you if you could use a VPN to change your country in order to get a better price. This isn't sponsored or anything. This is just a tool I've been experimenting with. I linked RatePunk and my favorite VPN below. If you're from the USA, you might be very accustomed to tipping. You might also be used to our new tipping shame culture where at the kiosk, even if all you did was order a coffee, the recommended tip begins at 20% and goes up to 25 or 30. You nervously pick the lowest one and now you feel like a jerk. Let me tell you something. In much of Europe, servers and restaurant workers are paid a living wage. So a good way for you to save money is to make sure that you're not tipping too much when you don't need to. This totally varies by place, but I recommend using the free app Globe Tips to understand the tipping customs and the etiquette for wherever you're at. And listen, if you want to leave a huge tip, go for it, but this is a good way to save. Another easy way to save on any international trip, by the way, is not checking your bag and packing carry-on only instead. Many airlines do not include a free checked bag, especially for basic economy tickets. So if you want to avoid paying $50 each way, Packing light can save you money and hassle and reduce the risk of lost luggage. And when you're climbing all those stairs in train stations and your hotel, you'll thank me. The biggest cost for most people's Europe trips is the flight. We're talking a third of the budget or more. And cutting down the flight cost, getting from $1,000 or even $1,500 to like $500 or less is a great goal and very attainable. One of my favorite ways to do this is using flight deal services like FareDrop to be alerted about cheap flights to your desired destination. Basically, you receive an email alerting you that there's a cheap flight to where you want to go, a link to that flight deal on Google Flights, and info about what it typically costs. That's it. Basically, you're paying them to pay attention to the prices for you. I've taken several trips to Europe because of flight deal alert services like this, where I paid between $500 and $600 per person for round-trip flights. I'm also a big fan of using points and miles from credit cards and have taken several very close to free flights as a result of points that we earned by simply paying our bills and normal life expenses on cards that earn points. This year we visited Belgium and the Netherlands using points, and we had to pay just like $200 in taxes and fees for our round-trip flights. Last year, I took our family of 3 on a trip to Austria and Germany, and we flew business class both ways. These flights alone should have cost $27,000, and all we had to pay was taxes and fees. Another way to save is actually a mini course that I made on how to save money traveling Europe. It's a 90-minute deep dive that covers the 7 big Europe money mistakes travelers make and a breakdown of how anyone can easily save $1,000 or more on their next trip to Europe. I go into so much more detail there about booking lodging and how to find a great place, and give screen shares and examples. We talk about how to find cheap flights with walkthroughs on points and miles and recommended credit cards. And I also include several exclusive discounts for some of our top recommended travel products. These are the exact tips that I wish I had had when my wife and I first set out to travel Europe for way less without sacrificing our experience. If that sounds interesting to you, click the link below to learn more. And if you've got a Europe trip on the books but aren't sure what to pack, check out this video. Thanks so much for watching. Happy travels.